Hey, all you crazy sci-fi fans. Time for your daily dose of insanity. Over here at the Sci-Fi Shenanigans Podcast with your hosts, J.R. Handley and me, Chris Winder. Just two nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions. A place where the sky's the limit, space is the place, and nerds run the world. Without further ado.
All right, Chris, thank you for that wonderful, humble, everybody says so introduction. You do it perfectly every time.
Naturally.
And you're so humble, like I said. Everyone says so.
Of course I do.
And you do say so yourself.
And that only took one take. I did that on the first try. It was amazing.
All right. Today we are doing an interview with author M.K. Clark. She's a author and tech writer based in Austin, Texas. In addition to publishing science fiction, she has produced multiple children's plays for community theater groups, published an undergraduate thesis, and received an honors Bachelor's of Arts in English and Literature from the University of Texas in Arlington, where she currently lives with her husband and two fur babies. And yes, if that sounds like it was prepped, it's because we cheated and stole that from her bio. How lazy is that? Outstanding. So I actually met MK first when we were looking for authors to get started and introduced her to Chris, but I found her when I was researching the various author groups, and I did some beta reading for her Space Jumper novel. So when we were starting this up and we needed people to talk to, I thought, this could be interesting. So here we are. Do you want to say anything else to introduce yourself, or did we cover it okay?
No, I think that about covers it.
Outstanding. All right. So we always start with the question for our author interviews of what you love about science fiction.
Okay. So I think for me, what I love the most about science fiction is basically the idea that anything can happen. I mean, I know that anything can happen in like fantasy and stuff like that, but there's an element of realism to science fiction, I think, because science is all about finding out new things. And the idea that some of this stuff, if we discover how it actually works, it could really happen in the future. And I think that's fascinating.
So the potential
of
what you write actually coming true someday, as opposed to there's probably not going to be dragons.
Yeah. You know, I think I put it in the intro to one of my books where, you know, this idea of it may not happen the way that, you know, we explain it in our writing or something, but there's an actual potential for this to be real one day, which is very cool.
All right. Well, first, let me correct both of you. All right. So I'm the one trained historian, you two are the tech geeks. And as a historian, I can tell you I have seen the old maps, and this way be dragons is legitimate. It's on the maps. It must be true. Nobody ever lied in the age before internet. Exactly. So just because. All right. So what really happened is the aliens brought the Stargate and took all the dragons away to repopulate other planets.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. It was because they were eating people. It was just rude. All right. So,
okay.
Oh, well, that was kind
That's
of
right. Dinosaurs were cranky. They like to eat people. Yeah. So they just threw the meteor for them.
They just decided the dinosaurs weren't worth it.
Galactic pest control.
Science, people. Absolutely. They just threw a giant rock.
Okay.
What they call that? An orbital kinetic weapon?
All right.
Oh my gosh. So
when I was reading your bio when we were prepping for the show, you mentioned that your evolution from childhood to writing now, as far as what you wanted to be when you grew up, started with wanting to be a fighter pilot. So would you like to tell us that story?
I don't know when I actually decided that I wanted to be a fighter pilot, but I just know that I did one day because, I don't know, I thought they were cool. Mostly jets. Like, I didn't want to fly something else. I definitely just wanted to fly jets because, one, it was flying, and then two, because it was fast. And I've kind of always had a thing for speed.
I can totally understand.
So
I have probably paid for the police's retirement with all the tickets I paid.
Yeah, I got into some trouble with that. But yeah, so I've kind of always had a thing for speed, and I wanted to do that for a long time. And then I think I got into high school and I started really looking at how to fly jets with the military. And I think you either had to be good at taking orders or good at science, and I wasn't good at either. So I knew I had to do something else.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I'm afraid of heights, so that would never actually happen with me. No, never. I can't even imagine.
Well, I've got 2 strikes against me for flying. I'm colorblind and I wear glasses, so
Ouch.
Yeah.
that left pretty much the infantry.
All right, so speaking of things that happen on the ground, it also says that you do plays. Has science fiction or writing in general, has it influenced how you create plays?
So the play thing is actually totally separate from the science fiction thing. That was something we had a kind of mentor relationship with a librarian when I was growing up, and we spent a lot of time in the library with her. And so she kind of pioneered a community theater program when I was real young, and so I was in a bunch of the plays growing up. And then when I moved back to the area in college, she reached out to me and asked me to write some plays for her and to direct them.
Wow.
And so I decided to do that because I was just really getting serious about not writing, but publishing, I guess. And really thinking, hey, this is something that I want to do. So I was like, yeah, this would be a great opportunity for that. So I started writing those plays, and I actually think they helped me a lot as an author because I was a very descriptive writer, and I didn't do dialogue very well. And plays are mostly dialogue. So,
right.
They actually really helped me be a better author, I think, doing that. So that was a really good opportunity for me in multiple ways.
Sure, I can imagine exercising a muscle that hadn't been used before.
Yep.
Yeah, the dialogue muscle.
Yep.
That works.
I talk way too much to have any problem writing dialogue.
Yes, this is true. He's actually been really quiet. Are you sick? Are you good, yeah?
No. I was just trying not to talk over you. I thought, this might be the episode where you got to say 10 words.
Yeah, I've said my 10 words. It's all you now. I'm going to go make a cup of coffee.
Well, see, if you say that and you don't mean it, I'm going to cry. Now, the plays that you write, are they science fiction related? I mean, obviously, it's different, but what kind of plays do you write for the kiddies?
They're actually not science fiction at all. They kind of are more in another level, which is not short stories, but almost, I guess they're short stories, but they're like old stories, like fairy tales, like the Grimm's fairy tales and stuff like that, which is a huge love of mine, of course. I'm a Disney person, so I love Disney, and I love everything about the origins of where Disney came from. So all the Grimm's fairy tales and the Hans Christian Andersen and all of that is a real love of mine. So my plays are actually kind of lean toward that genre because I think that they're more child friendly and easier to do, especially in a community theater setting where with the program that I was in, we were not only doing these plays with the children to get them into theater and to teach them how to act and start their whole theater careers, but we also had another side program that I ran where we taught them how to put everything else together for people who didn't want to act, but they wanted to learn about how to do scenery and how to do lighting and how to do all this other stuff. So it's a little harder to do science fiction, I think, without all of the complicated tech you need to do all of that. So the child-friendly Grimm's fairy tale type of thing is much easier to do in a program like that. So we did King Thrushbeard. I don't know if you've ever heard of that one. I wrote a play for that. I wrote a play for something else I can't remember anymore. would have to look it up. But then I think the last one I wrote before I moved away was a collection of Aesop's fables, which was really kind of fun to put together because I had the story of the hare and the turtle as the unifying theme of the whole play. And basically the whole race was them going through and hitting up, like coming across all of these other stories that happen in Aesop's fables. So you had like a whole bunch of other stories because as they did their race, they ran across them. So that was really fun, like exercise, not just with the kids, but to write and to learn to tie together all of these different stories and episodes with like one unifying theme. So that was a really fun exercise for me as a writer.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's a great way to grow it.
Yeah. So I kind of find it, like I said, it really isn't sci-fi, but it's still a lot of fun as a writer.
Well, I mean, it makes you more dynamic because if Hollywood ever came knocking, you're not relying on someone else to tell your story in this new medium. So it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Plus, it's good. It's good. It's interesting to hear how authors have developed their craft. And so this is a really interesting way to develop the craft.
Yeah, it's a really good exercise for like if you struggle with how to do, a unifying plot and then have a bunch of subplots on other layers as well. Like that's a really good way to learn how to do that, I think, because you start to learn to look at things on multiple levels, whereas before you were just looking at one plot. So, at the time I was finishing up the first book of the Young Soldier series when I wrote this Aesop's Fables play. And then I went back and I added a whole bunch more layers after that.
That's great. All right. Well, personally, I can remember back to when I was 3 years old and my sister came home from the hospital. And so I can remember my first taste of sci-fi. But what was your first taste? Wait
a minute. That's one heck segue. What? So your first taste of sci-fi is when your sister came home from the hospital?
No. I can remember back to 3. My first taste of sci-fi when I was 4, and I went to see Star Wars in the theater.
Okay, I always thinking maybe there was like ET relationship with your sister or something you weren't sharing with us.
She did have antenna, but we had those removed when she was a baby.
Okay. You could continue.
Oh, great! Now she's going to hear all about it. I'll have to edit that part out.
So,
all right. So what was your first? Your first memory, your first taste of sci-fi that got you hooked?
So this is kind of interesting because I've actually had to kind of go back and step myself back toward this idea because I actually got curious about it myself one day. Because honestly, I never considered myself to be a science fiction person, like ever. And then one day, I don't know, a couple of years ago, really, like even when I was writing science fiction, I didn't consider myself a science fiction person. Like this is how delusional I was. So one day my best friend just came out and I said something and she was like, that is not true. You're definitely a science fiction person. I'm like, what are you talking about? No, I'm not. She's like, yeah, you are. So I started like looking back to see if I really was or not. And sure enough, I have a picture book. It doesn't even have words in it. I have a picture book called The Box that I had my mother, quote unquote, read to me every night before I could even read words.
Wow.
This picture book is about, and I actually went and I found it online and I bought like 4 different copies of this picture book so that I could give it to like my nephews and stuff. But the story is about this little boy and his teddy bear, and he has this cardboard box, and he gets inside this cardboard box with his teddy bear, and he shoots off into space, and they go on this adventure to this new world, and they run into like a bunch of aliens, and somebody like tries to steal the bear and lock him up, and he has to go and rescue his, and then they, have to go back to the rocket, which is the cardboard box, and, get back home and stuff. And it's this whole little adventure in a picture book. And that's when I found this and I, traced this all the way back to then. I was like, yeah, I guess
All right. So if she can send us the link, we'll throw the book in the show notes.
It's an awesome book.
So that way, if anybody wants to see it, do you know the name of the book?
Yes, the awesome eye.
All right.
It's called The Box. Yeah, it took me a while to find it because I don't think it's in print anymore, but I did find it. It wasn't that expensive, the copies that I found. So I did buy 4 of them. I don't know if I bought the last 4, but I bought them.
So if there are no more available, you know who to send the hate mail to.
That's right.
Just
We'll have our contact info in the show notes.
Outstanding. So I started thinking about that when you guys were talking because, I was trying to remember the first one. And I remember when I was younger, I would read books that were not appropriate for my age, mostly because it irked the adults in my life. So like I remember getting in trouble in the 4th grade for reading Stephen King, not because I necessarily loved Stephen King, but just because they were like, no, don't do that. What are you thinking? And so I think the first time I actually consciously decided to read something because I wanted to was Orson Scott Card's The Memory of Earth series, because it seemed a lot like fantasy to me, the way he set that universe up. So that was it for me. He did some good stuff. I remember when I was in, this is in the ancient days of dial-up when we still had AOL, and it was that, you've got mail, all that nonsense. If you're not old enough to understand that, you're just too young. But that was for the listening audience. But, that was a big deal. I remember we had like a computer conference with him where he was in the chat with us in my middle school English class, where Orson Scott Card did that, and we asked him all kinds of questions. So, but anyway, so how did your love for reading, science fiction picture books and all of that transition into deciding, what, I'm going to write novels?
So, well, since I never really considered myself a science fiction girl, I don't really feel like it did. That's not really why I started writing, or even why I started writing science fiction. But actually, my dad used to encourage my sister to write. She's just about a year older than me. And he would always read the little short stories that she read and like encourage her and tell her how awesome they were and stuff like that. And I just got super jealous. So I decided I was going to write because I'm just a super jealous person, I guess. But then I never showed him anything that I wrote, so it was kind of self-defeating. But at some point,
whatever works, I guess.
Yeah, at some point that turned into like serious writing. I wrote a bunch of different short stories, and that turned into writing the type of stuff that I wanted to read. And I don't know, I just felt like there wasn't enough stuff out there that I wanted to read, so I was going to write what I wanted to read. And that just happens to be apparently science fiction, even though I didn't admit that until, 3 years ago.
Okay. So where did you, let me phrase this a little bit better. When you started writing, and you decided you were writing these stories that you wanted to read, which is I think what all good writers do, because if you don't want to read it, why the heck would anybody else? What do you think is your single largest influence on how you write in those stories that you want to read?
Probably Orson Scott Card. I love him. I love everything that he does. I read all of his books. I'm obsessed with Orson Scott Card. So most definitely hands down him, for sure. And then probably after that, an author called Marcus Zuzak, who wrote The Book Thief. I don't know if you've ever read that, but
I haven't.
No, I've heard of it though.
That book in particular has influenced not me in the genre, but just my writing in general, because that's who I want to write like. The way that he writes The Book Thief is like nothing I've ever read before. Just how he uses description and prose and everything. I mean, it's amazing. He's how I want to write.
Okay. So since we've talked about Card twice now, I think he really ought to give us a little bit of kickback. But, we're going to be generous and keep talking about him. So you've read everything he's written, you said. So did you watch the movie adaptation of Ender's Game? Of
course.
What'd you think?
Multiple times. The same day.
Okay. So you enjoyed it, I take it. Unless you're like a masochist and we didn't.
I did not like it at all, which is why I watched it a second time, because I was really disappointed and I wanted to give it a second try to see if I liked it better the second time around. Like, did I just go into this movie with a bunch of expectations that weren't met, and that's why I didn't like it? Or, if it was just a crappy movie. I watched it again to try and determine that. And then I went home and I actually wrote an essay about the changes that they made from the book to the movie to just try and rationalize some of the changes to see if maybe I could get in the head of the script writer to see why did they make these changes and were they justifiable. And by the time I was done writing the essay, I was actually okay with the changes that they made.
Huh.
So, yeah, I rationalized all of them. And when it all made sense to me and I watched the movie a third time, I was like, yeah, that was okay. That was a good movie.
Yeah, that's dedication.
Wow. I never thought about doing that. That makes sense.
I needed to like this movie, guys.
Cognitive dissonance is a thing. I mean...
I'm only slightly obsessed.
Obsessed, passionate, whatevs. So, does your husband humor you in all of this, or does he just roll his eyes? I get a lot of eye rolling from my wife.
Yeah.
He actually does humor me. It's really quite funny. He is so supportive of what I do, and he tries so hard to be supportive as well. And it's really quite entertaining because he, the first book is I categorize it as a young adult because it's a coming of age story. And he apparently, I've learned this, hates coming of age stories. and he tries to be supportive. So he's been reading through the book, and he's been reading through the book for a year now, just trying to make it through because he hates coming of age stories. And so he's still pushing through it. Like, I'm almost to the end now. He's like, it's a good book. I just don't like young adult stories. So he tries. Yeah. And then I'll have random conversations with him about topics that he doesn't even understand what I'm talking about, mostly because I start in the middle of a conversation that I started in my head. And he just kind of sits there and nods. And he's like, okay, And then I'll be like, well, good talk. And I'll go away. And he's just like, I have no idea what just happened.
I can understand that.
All right. I'm not alone.
No, I feel like we should be chanting one of us, one of us. So, all right. So, sorry. All right. So the series that you mentioned that you're writing, the Young Soldier book. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that series?
So this series is, the first 3 books of this series are about Dawn. And like I said, it's a coming of age story. So it starts out where he's really young, and it follows him as he grows up into an adult. But the series as a whole follows him from the time of when he's young and he's just starting out and he wants to be a space jumper. That's the thing he's wanted forever and ever. And that's what he's starting out to do. And he's got to overcome a bunch of different things to do that. But as he overcomes all these, obstacles, and he, grows up and gets into the real world and starts to see how the real world works, his perspective on things kind of changes, and he becomes a little bit cynical. And eventually what happens is he overthrows the governing body in this world. And that's not something that I'm giving away. This is not a spoiler or anything. You find that out at the very beginning of the book. So that's not a spoiler, I promise. But he, throughout his journey, he overthrows the governing body of the world. And so the series just kind of is this, it introduces this concept at the very beginning of the series where what happens in the future. that he overthrows the governing body, and he does this through a rebellion. And you know that 20, 30 years after this rebellion and after he's overthrown the governing body, people hate him. And so that's the introduction to the series is you know that people hate him for what he did. And then you start the series and you start at the very beginning of his journey. And the series is just kind of like, how did he go from being this kid to the person that everybody hates?
So that's kind of a heavy way to start a series.
Yeah.
So where did you like? How did that evolution of a story idea sort of start for you?
I don't remember, like, long time ago when I was plotting this book out. Like, I don't remember when I initially came across the idea for this, but I do know what kind of sparked it for me. And I don't remember why, but I was doing research into things like Alexander the Great. And it just kind of made me stop when I was, looking into his history and what he did. And we call him Alexander the Great, right? But he was a horrible person, and he did like Nazi Germany horrible killing, right? Like mass murder. We hate Hitler for the stuff that he did, but we call Alexander the Great, right? And it's this concept of how history changes how we see people, one, because of time, and like time changes how we look at things. And then also because of not necessarily who wins a conflict, but who kind of takes control after a conflict and the history that they choose to write, right? So the idea behind this was really centered around these types of themes where I wanted to explore these concepts of time and also perspective, right? And how perspectives change over a period of time. And when you start to look at history and things like that, and you go back, 100 years even, you can look at events that occurred, and what we think about what was happening at that time is completely different than what they thought about it then, right? So I find time to be a fascinating subject. So that's kind of where it came from.
Okay. Well, that's a little interesting because I find history fascinating, but we're going to use that natural pause and take a second for a word from our sponsors.
Don O'Hara was lucky. At least, that's what everyone else said. Born the son of a general, with a guaranteed ticket to commander's school, Don had his future laid out for him. Only he didn't want that future. All he ever wanted was to be a space jumper. Lucky for him, he never lacked guts. Pursuing Dreams is an action-packed science fiction young adult adventure that takes the reader on a wild ride as Don fights for his dream and, as a result, stumbles upon the truth about his family and the O'Hara legacy. With his life turned on end and unable to shake the feeling that he's being watched, Don does the only thing he can. He keeps moving forward, not knowing that every step takes him closer to becoming the most hated man alive.
Okay, welcome back. So, I'm curious. Some authors, when they start a series, already have it planned out where it's going to end, or at least they have an idea of how it's going to end, or at least how many books they'd like to see. Where do you see your series going, the Young Soldier series?
So this series, the way I initially planned it, was going to just have 3 books, and that was it. I was going to follow Don's story throughout the 3 books, and the 3 books really look at separate periods of time in his journey, and that plot kind of follows, and then it really ends, and that's pretty much it. So originally, that's the story that I was going to tell. In the many years that I've been plotting and writing this story, I've had ideas of how to expand the universe a little bit, how to follow other characters. There's a lot of different groups involved throughout the different plots. So there's a lot of other characters where I could not even just in the Space Jumper program, but, in another group that you see in the book that you don't really get a whole lot of insight to, but their whole group is really fascinating. And I know that because, I'm the author and I know everything about the world. There are characters and stories that I could pursue in those other groups that would still fit the young soldier concept, right? Because, they're all young characters. That they start out, it's all coming of age. I really do like coming of age stories. So I do have things where I could expand if I really wanted to, but at this point, it's just those 3 books, and then I may expand later if there's a lot of support for the series and there's a lot of people who just want more in that world. So, it could expand.
All right. So when you're done with this series, right, you've mentioned where you thought this individual series goes, but let's say you 6 months from now, you've written the last 3 novels in the universe and you're going to write something else. Where do you see yourself going with your next creation?
Like in this series or just like in general, writing something completely different?
Assuming that you're writing something after The Young Soldiers.
I've been exploring a lot of different topics through some short stories. And so one of them, I'm actually planning a couple of short stories that eventually, like I'll publish them separately as short stories and then I'll combine them into one book, as it were. But it also kind of follows that same kind of episodic structure of the Young Soldier series where the 3 books follow the different periods of his life. So the short stories all kind of look at different time periods of the same event that occurs. So I definitely want to follow that one through. And that's kind of like, it's science fiction, but it's also like an apocalyptic science fiction. So that one's kind of fun. So I'm plotting that one out as well. And I probably will publish it while I'm publishing the Young Soldier story, not after, because I feel like, there'll be fun stuff to do in between. And I feel like writing other things keeps me from getting bored with the current story. So there's that one. And then I've got a couple of other ones. I've got a fantasy, actually, that I really want to write, and it has no science fiction at all.
Like an Anne McCafferty kind of fantasy or a fantasy kind of fantasy?
No, pretty much fantasy.
Okay.
No science fiction, nothing, no technology.
All right. So I just wanted you to know when you were talking about Alexander the Great that, and everybody listening needs to know this, that Chris used his administrator function and he muted the heck out of me because I totally could have taken this to like a 12-hour show about my love of history, but he just grabbed the hook and pulled me off stage. So you're welcome. I was working on, before I deployed and got hurt, I was working on a master's degree in colonial American history. So,
wow.
So studying dead people is my thing.
Nice.
So, well, they can't disagree with you. And for someone as opinionated as me, it's perfect. They're dead.
Oh my God.
Absolutely. What are they going to think about it? So, all right. That's interesting. So do you think that jump into the fantasy is going to potentially lose your readers, or do you think they're going to transition?
I think my plan would be, in order to not lose my readers, be publishing a science fiction alongside a fantasy. Like, I wouldn't just publish the fantasy. Like, I would probably be publishing some kind of science fiction material at the same time that I was publishing the fantasy. So I'll just kind of hold the fantasy back until I have something ready to publish, because that I don't want to just lose my readership and be like, what is she doing? That's just kind of something where I just really like the premise of the story, and I've been holding on to it for some time. So it's kind of more going to be like a hobby thing for me rather than, oh, I'm going to start writing fantasy.
So more of a palate cleanser.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it'll be sci-fi plus fantasy instead of sci-fi or fantasy.
Right. Yeah,
Got it.
the fantasy will definitely be more like a one-off hobby thing. Like, oh, she is doing something new. Now let's go back to the science fiction.
Okay. So do you foresee this becoming a full-time gig for you, or you like the day job?
That is the dream, isn't it?
Not for everyone. I've talked to authors who like their day job. They wouldn't want to do the writing full time.
I think for me, it's more of kind of a in the middle. I don't know. I mean, I can't say for sure whether I would want to be a full-time author or not because I've never had the opportunity. But I do enjoy my day job. You know, I work as a technical writer for an information security department. So I get to do a lot of things in my day job that I normally would have no reason to do. You know, I do a lot of research into different technology and information security and what hackers and criminals are up to. Actually, I do a lot of research into the dark web, you know, and I learn a lot of things that I actually find very helpful when I'm writing because, you know, I can speak on authority on certain things that I wouldn't normally be able to do. And so I like having that. And my job is really interesting. So that's nice. I really love what I do. So I don't think I would ever want to leave that entirely. But if I could do a part-time in my position and part-time author, that would be, I think, the goal for me. That would be my optimum existence because right now it's just really hard to get the time to write in the evenings and on the weekends. Sometimes I'm like, bye, honey. I'll see you at 9:00 tonight.
Yeah.
Definitely understand the balance.
Mm-hmm.
It gets even more complicated when you get kids in the picture.
Yeah, no kids. No. Not me.
Well, I mean, you've got the fur babies to complain and bite your toes when you don't get enough attention.
They are a handful. Oh my goodness. We might have the most jealous dogs on the planet. They are so jealous of just each other. I swear, they're like my toddler nephews. You cannot give one of them something and not give the other one the same thing. Like you can't pet one of them on the head and then not pet the other one because they would lose their mind.
What kind of dogs do you have?
We have it's a Catahoula leopard dog, if you've ever heard of that.
I have not.
And he's about 70 pounds. He's about the size of a lab.
Okay.
And then we have a Great Dane.
Ooh, those are big.
Yeah, he's massive. He's 150 pounds.
Wow. What made you decide to get a horse and call it a dog?
Well, actually, he's my husband's. He came with the marriage.
Okay, fair enough.
But actually, I think the story with DOG, that's his name, DOG, for real.
A dog named Dog. I like it.
So DOG was actually my brother-in-law's dog, I believe. And my brother-in-law was stationed overseas for a period of time. So we just kind of, or Doreen, my husband, inherited him. And then we kept him.
So you're a dog napper in your spare time.
Yes, we are dog nappers. Yes. Unfortunately.
Outstanding. Criminal masterminds.
Yeah, unfortunately, my husband won't let me dog nap anymore. Although I do show him cute pictures of dogs all the time.
Well, I mean, could your existing dogs, could they take the jealousy of one more? I don't know.
Yeah.
All right. So now that we've talked about your books, enough shameless plugging. So what are you reading in the genre of science fiction? Besides the two you've already mentioned with Orson Scott Card and Marcus. Oh goodness, I'm going to mispronounce his name, but Zusak.
Marcus Zusak is not actually, The Book Thief is not science fiction.
Okay.
It's historical fiction. So that doesn't count as science fiction, unfortunately. However, I'm also not reading any science fiction currently, as horrible as that sounds.
Gasp.
I know, it's awful. I'm bad author.
No. Some authors will actually avoid it on purpose because they're afraid that what they're reading will influence what they're writing.
Well, I think for me, like, I'm working on a project right now with a group of writers where we're doing a short story series where all of our short stories are within the same series. And so I've been coordinating getting that ready. And so I've been doing a bunch of editing and reading all of their stuff. So I haven't really had time to actually read science fiction books. But I'm also reading some fantasy and comedy right now because I think that it helps me like get out of science fiction and stay a little more versatile than like just doing the standard science fiction thing. The comedy helps me try and not get lost in just the deep science technology stuff and fantasy is just fun for me. I've always loved fantasy, so I'm reading the Shannara Chronicles right now, and I am
I love those.
rereading Janet Ivanovich's Stephanie Plum series because I love that one.
Okay,
it's so funny.
So have you looked at any of the space comedy that's out there? Like I think it's Barry Hutchinson, right, Chris?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So I haven't read any of it yet. I have it. It's queued up on my Kindle, but I haven't actually read it yet. I do own it. I have really good intentions of reading it.
I'm a horrible impulse buy when it comes to it.
Yeah, when you do eventually read it, I think you'll enjoy it.
Yeah.
It's a hoot.
Do you do any audiobook listening to get some of that reading in while you're commuting?
I used to, but I had to stop taking the train last year. So now I listen to podcasts.
Okay.
I have audiobooks. I've actually been listening to my audiobook recordings recently because I hired somebody to do audiobooks for me. So I've been listening to a lot of the recordings of my own.
That has to happen. I have minions for that.
Yeah. I don't.
I know that sounded. You should do that.
I should. I really should. But
see, I put my mom and my wife to work, and if I need more minions, I guess I'm going to have to become a polygamist or something because there's only so many hours in the day.
Wow, you went there.
I have a control issue. I think I just I have to know that it's okay myself. Like I have to listen.
See, I don't. So once I tell the story, for me, I've moved on. So like, I don't even, I do it because obviously you have to, but I don't even like going back to the editing. I'm like, nope, I want to tell the next story.
Yeah.
So.
But I actually don't mind listening to the audiobook. I hate editing. But for me, the audiobook files are actually really interesting because I can be totally sick of my book. Because I've been editing, right? Just I can't read another page of my own work because I've edited it so much, and then I'll listen to the audio file, and it's like a whole new story for me. Just because, one, I'm not narrating it, so I don't have to listen to my own voice. But I like listening to somebody else read it. It's a whole new adventure.
See, I don't know. When I had to do that on my end, it was very, very, I don't know. I felt kind of cringy. I'm like, ooh. But then again, like I said, I'd already moved on. It was my story, so I knew everything about it. And I definitely think listening to your audiobooks is definitely a good way to grow. Or just the when you hear how it's read as opposed to how you see it in your head. It definitely changes how you write, I think, when you realize someone's going to be saying this out loud.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
It gives you a whole new respect for people that write stage plays.
Yep.
Right, and you got to be careful what you name your characters because they have to be pronounceable.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, that has been such a interesting thing with this audiobook because I actually hired somebody from the UK to do the recording. And so the pronunciation, like we use different words for things, and then the way that he pronounces the names and the way that I heard the names in my head are sometimes totally different. And so it's like, oh, well, sometimes, it's like, well, that actually is okay. And then like, no, you have to fix that.
Yeah, I don't know. I got really, really lucky, and I remember when we dealt with Jeffrey Kiefer, I think is how you say his name. He does the audio for mine, and he was so shocked. He's like, "Now, how do you pronounce this and this?" And I'm like, "I don't know." I mean, I read it on the page, but I wasn't attached to any pronunciation. And I think as long as you can do that, it makes it very, very easy because you can become whatever you want it to be.
Yes.
I mean, you could spell red and they could call him Bob, and as long as the narrator is consistent, well, that's just how you pronounce it.
Right.
So, well, obviously nothing that extreme, but I think it's when people get really, really attached that it's when you start driving your narrators insane.
Yes. Yeah.
So when could we expect your audiobooks to come out? Do you have any ideas on that yet?
Spring? Is that a big enough answer?
Sure.
That
Perfect.
Hey, here's another question, because I'm fascinated. I'm very, very curious about some of the stuff that you've researched. Is there any new scientific breakthroughs, any new, especially like scary tech that's coming out that you're fascinated by, that you're going to be doing more research on? What do you see coming out in science that excites you?
Well, like I do research every day for my job, but that's all, technology based. I do have a kind of science queue lined up in my newsfeed so that I'm, seeing the scientific breakthroughs and, the stuff that's coming, because it's good for, I think, every science fiction out there. But I don't think there's anything in particular that I think has come out that I recently that has caught my eye. I think last year the big ones for me was getting to see the progress of 3D printing, as well as the advances in the bio world with the artificial wombs. I think that has a lot of applicability, not just, in the sense of it's an artificial womb, but I think there's a lot of things you could do with that science once they get the science down, right? Not just, hey, we can keep babies alive outside the body. There's a lot of applicability there. And I think there's a lot of things that we as authors can do with that. So that to me is really fascinating, and keeping up with that has been one of my things, to read what's going on there, what have they learned, and what new thing are they doing. Other than that, I think I really am interested to see what Boeing does with the plasma force field shields that they've patented.
Oh, that's awesome.
I think that's just kind of cool. That's the cool science in me that really wants to see that happen.
So everybody who's expecting the next super secret project reveal from me that will be coming soon, when it's delayed because I've fallen into the rabbit hole of research because now I want to know about these artificial wombs, send your hate mail to MK Clark. We will have her contacts in the show notes, and I'm sorry in advance.
Quit distracting,
because that sounds fascinating.
Really? You hadn't read about that yet? Like that?
No, I haven't.
Really?
I've been focused on like the mech stuff. Like
I'm pretty sure
we were talking about this.
I'm pretty sure they grew a sheep. If I remember this correctly, I'm pretty sure they grew a sheep in an artificial womb.
Yeah, I saw pictures of it.
Yeah, I did a quick Google when you were describing it because my mind lit up. But so the what I've been focusing more is on like the more military applications. So like Israel recently took a drone that they added a sniper rifle to, which we've talked about in one of our science episodes, which I thought was really, really cool. And then they had some breakthroughs in like mech suits. Like Japan built they call it the land mech. It's like for toddlers. It's literally a mech suit for toddlers.
That's awesome.
There's no way that's going to go wrong.
I showed that to my wife, and she's like, yeah, no, your kids aren't getting one. I tried to tell her all the cool kids would have one and they would feel left out, but I got the look. So, sorry, boys. I tried. So, no, I've been looking at more like the military applications. I spend way too much time on DARPA's website on their military advancement stuff. So, and I've been following they have like a not really biofoam like most science fiction writers use it, but they've got like the artificial band or like a liquid Band-Aid that you spray on that's supposed to like seal wounds. So I've been looking at a lot of the medical applications.
Yep.
And I've been paying a lot of attention to like the helmet improvements. So one of the things that's changed with warfare is that our ability to get people off the battlefield when they're wounded to a hospital, a MASH unit, whatever, has increased so greatly that people are living with wounds that would have killed them before, myself included. And so, like, I've been following like some of the developments that came out of that. I know military warfare, because war zones get a lot of injured people, has led the way in some science and medical breakthroughs. So I've been following like the advancements in helmets. They've been working with the NFL about some better helmets for soldiers that are like help with concussions and stuff. I just find all that fascinating. But that's not the one that I actually have been watching the closest. So the hypersonic SR-71 plane was a Cold War long dead project for a spy plane, and they've made it hypersonic, and the 71 became 72. So the SR-72 Blackbird, which it's a spy plane, so of course it's all over the internet.
Right.
Because we all needed to know about top secret government projects, but that just looks interesting. But it appears from what I can find to be unmanned. And when I see unmanned and computer controlled and AI controlled, all I think of is, you want Skynet? This is how you get Skynet. So,
yeah.
What about you, Chris?
Oh, the one I've been watching is actually probably the 7th or 8th one I've seen, but the latest one, the interwebs is calling it the Michigan Meteor. This was just, we're right in the middle of January, so not too long ago. This meteor exploded over Michigan, caused a 2-point-something earthquake. It was seen by all the states around it, and it fascinates me that there's either so many of these, or they're happening more often, or possibly because people have dash cams, we're catching them more often, so we're noticing them, or there's something that the government is not telling us. So I love conspiracies, and especially ones about the end of the world.
We just watched a documentary on UFOs. There's definitely something the government's not telling us.
Oh, I believe it.
Absolutely. I'm not saying it was aliens, but I'm not saying it either. So, are you familiar with Curiosity Stream?
I'm not.
So basically, it's like Netflix, but it's got all documentaries, and they've got a bunch on space. My wife calls it Nerdflix because it's like literally like history. I've been binge watching like about the ancient Celts and all of that, but they also have a bunch on science and stuff that I watch with my son. So they've got some where they talk to Neil deGrasse. I can't pronounce his name, but Tyson.
Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah, so he's done a couple, and they've done a bunch on the science and stuff. And I'm waiting for them to come out and say, we know it's aliens. I'm waiting.
Yeah, that sounds really neat. That's definitely something. If I tell my husband about it, he'll get it all set up for me because he loves documentaries, and then I don't have to put any effort into it. It'll just happen. It'll just be there.
It's a pretty cool website. It's literally just curiositystream.com. And it's sort of like, once you get your subscription, you pay it by the year, I think is what we did. And the price varies on if you want regular HD or whatever is above HD. It's like, I can't even remember. 4K. Yeah, there we go. So, and, obviously the quality of the streaming, and then you either can watch it on your computer. If you're smart, you can hook your computer up to the TV and watch it that way, but it also will connect like to your Xbox One. I don't know if it does PlayStation yet.
So probably Roku as well.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. So this is where I smile and nod.
I still have the 360, so maybe it's backwards compatible.
How have you not upgraded?
Because Xbox is expensive.
This is true, but I mean, research.
And we're trying to be responsible adults, and pay our mortgage and stuff.
I mean, but this is for science.
It's vitally important.
This is research. Yes, it does take Roku. I'm on their website real quick. But I mean, this could be like research. So
Cool.
you could watch it, like you could play Halo, see, and then you're practicing for your Space Marine combat scenes. And then it's totally tax deductible. I mean, I don't work for the IRS, and I'm not an like a tax consultant. But I'm sure it's like a business expense.
I love it. Yeah. We totally pull that off.
Right? I mean, what could possibly go wrong?
Now, however, the IRS is going to audit me. Good job.
Or me, because I just said this.
I had nothing to do with either of them. Just in case anyone's listening.
I disavow.
Well, I got audited like 5 times when I was in college. Every single year I got audited. I don't know what they thought I was doing. But apparently,
Wow.
whatever I was doing, going to college, man, whew, that deserves auditing.
Knock on wood, I've never actually been audited. So now that I say that, I'm going to get a knock on the door. It's going to be the tax man. So that's fascinating. But yeah, I love it. It's got some pretty neat people on their staff. There is, trying to think, Michio M-I-C-H-I-O Michio Kaku is a physicist who teaches in New York, but he also wrote a book that a friend of the show, Terry Mixon, recommended for Chris and I called Physics of the Future. And he's actually, it's really cool. He did a bunch of books in that series. He's actually one of the advisory board members.
You should send me a link to that when this is over, because that actually sounds fascinating.
Yeah, I bought it.
All right. Well, yeah, I did too. I got a paperback, but or hardcover, excuse me. Let me make a note. We'll put that in the show notes. So, Physics of the Future. It's really cool. I've been browsing it, reading it with my son. He is 9 and loves everything science. So it's just, why not, encourage that,
Mm-hmm.
Go for it.
All right. So, in our last question before we transition out of this, because we could talk all day and then we'd have people falling asleep on us. And anyway, so what do you see as trends coming for 2018 with science fiction?
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to go with the answer that I think everybody's giving right now, which is lit RPG and virtual reality. Just because I think it's going to be really, really hard to escape the Ready Player One wave. I think that's going to be the big one. And I think that's going to kind of take over. Okay.
There's a recent development that Chris and we've talked about it, and we've done a couple tech episodes. And one of the ones that we mentioned briefly, just because there's not a lot out on it yet, but they actually have, it's almost like wearing a wetsuit, and it's got like electrodes all over it. And then the AI, when it interacts with it, or the virtual reality, you can like feel sensations from the virtual reality. So,
I know. I'm so excited. I want it.
Have you seen Demolition Man?
Let's see. No, I don't think I've actually seen that one.
Okay, well, it's a post-apocalyptic sort of sci-fi. That's the one with the 3 seashells, and Taco Bell's the only restaurant of the future. God help us all. But no, the reason I mentioned that is they actually have a scene where they're using essentially technology that sort of does that. So it's always cool when we see, technology from a sci-fi years later show up as legit. Like I just, that always blows my mind.
Yep, I love that too.
But yeah, it looks like I've watched testing, and it seemed, I mean, obviously they could be faking it. You never know. I mean, this could be like a soundstage in Hollywood, but it looked cool. So it's definitely worth looking into.
Read about that, and I like jumped out of my seat. I was so excited. Like, virtual reality is my thing. I have been waiting for virtual reality for 10 years. I have been watching, like, before this was even like a thing, I've been like scouring the internet for articles and like developments and stuff like that. Like, if I could be a beta tester for any of that stuff, I would be all over it. Like, that's my thing.
That was always my my favorite part of the the Star Trek, where they had the holodeck or whatever.
Oh yeah.
I totally never would have left that thing.
Yeah.
They'd have to like come kick me out because I'd be like, 5 more minutes, guys. They actually used that similar technology in the Orville.
Yeah.
I think that's awesome. But
Yes.
we're running a bit long, and Chris is giving me the evil eye through the monitor. Just like Sauron, he can do that stuff. People, be afraid, be very afraid. But so, where can listeners find you?
So I have a website, mkclarkbooks.com. That's pretty easy, where I post all the links to my books and I update what I'm working on and stuff like that. So that's a really easy way to find me, and just kind of get an overview of what I'm doing. But then I'm always on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram as well. So those are all really good ways to find me.
Outstanding. As usual, those will be in the show notes. Chris, do you want to tell people where they can find us?
Sure. Our website is www.sfshenanigans.com. Our Twitter is at SFS, that's Sierra Foxtrot Sierra _show. And our email is podcast@sfshenanigans.com.
Thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For Chris Winder, I'm J.R. Hanley, and this was the Sci-Fi Shenanigans Podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of space and all things that go boom.